I didn't take a risk with technology. You know, Charles had to keep saying, well, my animation's not working. And so I just decided I would stick with ruled notebook paper. So, and really I think that's pretty appropriate for Brackenridge Park. Let me just say, though, it's very exciting to follow Charles Birnbaum, and I've had a chance to listen to him at a couple different events because he's introduced so many things that will challenge us, that will be provocative, that we'll return to during the day as touchstones. But also he's really funny and he's really interesting, so it's a little bit intimidating to follow such a great speaker who, although he is not from San Antonio, clearly has an emotional connection with our community and with this particular landscape and with our story. And I think that's the touchstone here. Just like this piece of lined notebook paper is familiar and personal to me, this space, Brackenridge Park, is familiar and personal to so many of us. You know, Charles didn't plan this, but that picture of Anderson Cooper with that thing, whatever it was, I looked at that and I thought, that's Tom Crystal. That is Tom Crystal with one of the park cats. And so, you know, I kind of realized that when we think about the park, at least when I think about the park, and this is how I came to be involved both in the original board of the BPC and then working as the executive director, it was really about family. And it was really about, for me, this is the place where my daughter had her first birthday party. This is the place where, over time, there are families that when I would go on Easter had been meeting in the exact same place to camp for more than 50 years. And it's funny because someone said, well, we should charge people for that. We should set up some kind of system where they have to register. And I said, whoa. How do you know? How do you know where the campsites are? The park has a mental map to them that's completely different than the way we see it. Their map of the park is personal, and it's a history of their family and their grandparents. And that space belongs to them in a way that it doesn't belong to anyone else. So the park has a personal value, and that value inspires many of us to work on its behalf. You know, I saw the archaeology photographs there, and I don't know if Kay Hines is here today, but I saw her last night at an event. And when Kay talks about what the park tells us about not just who we are today, but where we have come from, why San Antonio looks the way it does, Kay is so excited and committed and proud of that history. It's a personal experience for her. So Brackenridge Park is a part of our family. It's a part of the San Antonio family. And when we did a survey a few years ago, Brackenridge Park was the park that people traveled the furthest to get to in San Antonio. It was the park that people stayed the longest at. And it was the park whose users most closely reflected the demographics of the city of San Antonio in terms of age, in terms of ethnicity. So the park is part of our family. Now, families are fabulous. Families are wonderful. They have fabulous resources. But sometimes it takes someone from outside your family to say, hey, you know, your family does this and that's really neat, but your family also does that and that's a little strange. So sometimes it takes someone from the outside to come in and say, you know, there's a little bit of dysfunction going on here that you might need to, you know, pay attention to. And I think that's, you know, just keep in mind that what's happening today is a bit like an intervention. The Cultural Landscape Foundation is holding an intervention for us so that we can really understand the function and the dysfunction of the way that we have treated Brackenridge Park over the years. Our first panel is going to feature some really fantastic projects that those of you who are from San Antonio and many of you who are not from San Antonio will be familiar with. Wonderful successes, including our downtown and the river and other public spaces. And so what we've been doing with these projects and what you'll see is not just creating a series of places that help anchor us in this community, but we're also building the local capacity to understand why design is important, to understand why programming is important, to understand why community gathering places are important, so that we can change the dialogue, so that every project we have, like Hemisphere, not only do we end up with a wonderful place that sparks new growth and interest, but it adds to the community conversation about affordable housing. It adds to the community conversation about how space is accessible. So the panel is both about the physical spaces, but also about how we as a community have grown and changed. And in fact, Brackenridge Park is perfectly poised right now to meet the needs of a San Antonio that's growing and changing. That when we talk about becoming a much more dense urban city, and we see that as the path forward through our SA Tomorrow plan, if we do that, green space and open space will become much, much more important for us. So Brackenridge Park is perfectly positioned both geographically in terms of its relation to downtown and in terms of what it can offer as both passive and active recreation to really enhance a city that is going to become more urban, more dense, where fewer people will have a yard, where fewer people will have their own ability to interact with nature in their own space. And then I think at the same time, although this isn't something that I think will be touched on very much today, one of San Antonio's 3 components of our SA Tomorrow plan, so one is that physical growth plan, a second is sustainability. And large green spaces like Brackenridge Park play a very important role in promoting environmental health in our community, in lowering the urban heat island, in providing a place for exchange when you have plants and trees and green material like that. So environmentally, we know that the park will play an increasingly important role. And then I think that San Antonio right now, with the designation of the missions as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, with the upcoming Tricentennial and the recognition that very few places in our country can do what San Antonio does as a community, talk about 300 years of history and the prehistory that laid the foundation for a story that is universally significant. Our story, our San Antonio story, has been repeated and changed and modified. What we've gone through here sets a common cultural ground with people all over the world. So we are beginning to understand and appreciate that in our community, and you will hear more about that from our panelists this morning, and I hope from our panelists this afternoon. So these trends are intersecting in an actual place, and that actual place is Brackenridge Park. How do we take these emerging values in our community, the value of our universal story, the value of the environment, the value of public places where we can interact, and how do we invest in Brackenridge Park in such a way that it meets those needs and that it reflects those values? And I want to talk very briefly, though, about a tension that we may hear this morning and we may hear a little bit about this afternoon, but it's a tension that's embodied in the process that got us to the great day of adopting a master plan yesterday. That tension is that for all of us who feel that Brackenridge Park is part of our family, there are professionals who are going to come in and talk to us about how we best use that resource, about how design plays a role, about programming and planning. And there may be a perception from people who feel a very strong ownership of the park, who feel that it's part of their family. The same way that there's resentment when there's an intervention, there can be resentment when why is this person telling me about my space? Why is this person telling me what I value? And I think that we've taken some really significant steps forward, not just in terms of park planning, and I see Councilman Trevino here, and I want to recognize his role in this, not just in terms of park planning, but in terms of planning overall, to reconcile what can be perceived as a conflict between growing our professional capacity, doing things the right way, and between the value of a family and the values that we hold for places in our community. So there is a tension, but I think that going out and meeting the community and even showing the photographs, as Charles did, of the Easter celebration, and when the Brackenridge Park Conservancy did a photographic exhibition of Easter celebrations in the park, that as we acknowledge those things, we begin to lower that tension, and we begin to come back to those universal human values. Being outside in the sunlight, watching your kids play, feeling proud of where you live. Those are not things that relate to one class or someone's professional capacity. They relate to who we are as people. And that's the true promise of a place like Brackenridge Park. So, you know, Charles focused a lot on how we measure success. And when I was with the Conservancy, I used to say that success would be when every single real estate ad said minutes to Brackenridge Park. So I have a slightly different standard now. But I think that today's gathering is a success. And I think the fact that we are asking these questions, and I just want to, I want to phrase them as statements. Open space is not vacant space. Park users are not the problem. Design does matter. The fact that we are having a conversation about these statements and about the other assertions that have already been made that we all accept now. Brackenridge Park is a cultural treasure. Brackenridge Park is a place of international significance. The fact that we're having that conversation, that's a success. A few years ago, I don't think that we could have generated this amount of interest in this place. And that is a tribute to all the friends who are gathered here today, and to all the people who have worked so hard, but also to all the people who over the years just loved the park. Now, they may have loved it to death in some ways. You know, I don't know if any of you have kids or you remember reading The Velveteen Rabbit. So the story of the Velveteen Rabbit is this child who has a beloved toy. And that toy is just loved to pieces. But at the end of the story, that toy becomes real. And that's what we're doing with the park. We're taking a place that was, oh, well, isn't the zoo there? Or, you know, yeah, I can sort of see that from Broadway, but, you know, we're taking that and we're turning it into a real place that lives in the hearts of everyone, and that will continue to do that in our community because we're going to invest in it in the right way. All right, thank you, all of you, for being here today.